Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now, what I want to talk about are some tips that you should definitely look into when thinking about how you plan to use UX motion in your designs. Now, these are things that I always recommend to people, and some of you may know some of these tips, some of them may seem like common sense, but it's always great to just have this as a reminder for what you should be doing, or at least thinking about when you're trying to create, different types of interactions. So let's jump right in. The first tip that I like to say is animate content as it moves between different types of states. A good animation fades the content in and out from one state to another. But a really great animation shows continuity in a transition by making the context move between. So if we see in this kind of this little form here, we're seeing that content kind of slide in, fade and slide nicely. If this were to just kind of appear, it'd be pretty abrupt for our users. So we want to make content kind of move nicely between states. Let's take a look at our next tip. Make connections with shared elements. Now, this one is pretty important as well. Using especially like the masking design principle, dolly and zoom principle, like using these kind of principles together could really help, especially with this tip, make those shared elements have a deep rooted connection. If we take a look at this card here, when the user clicks it, we don't want to go to an entirely new screen. I mean, we are on a new screen, but we don't want the user to kind of think that. We want the user to think that they're seamlessly moving through this type of narrative. So creating that type of, shared connection where the image expands much more really helps the user, move through that interaction. The great animation really establishes a connection between two states by animating the shared content. In this case, the image. Try staggering the delivery of your content. I know we talked about this a little bit when we were going through the motion design principles, but a really good animation quickly staggers the appearance of each group or element. It really helps you to kind of understand the type of elements you can interact with, maybe even establish some sort of hierarchy between what can be interacted with. But we'll see this right here after this kind of loads. When they've loaded the navigation at the top and then staggered the delivery of the flights below, it really helps understand that, okay, these two things are separate. And it really helps the user kind of interact or understand what they should be interacting with. Make the elements in your content aware of their surroundings. Just like in the real world, and this is kind of like, again, with skeuomorphic behavior, users are so used to one object affecting another. If I touch this block, the block moves. Or if I put another block on top of whatever I'm carrying, the stack gets higher. And the same kind of applies for things like this over here, where we have that loader and it affects all the different pieces or cards above it. That really helps the user understand how that content works together. It really does a good job of, showing the elements and how they get affected by their surroundings and how they could change based off of what's happening on the screen. So once again, it connects that mental model, and it also allows your 2D design or your 2D application kind of, a little bit break the mold as to what users may expect from it. And, it kind of provides a little bit of dimensionality. Provide context for menus. Now, this is another big one. Sometimes I see menus and they're okay, but they show like content appearing from the direction of the button that opened them, right? Like an example is this navigation. They'll just kind of pop out quickly. But, to get your really good interaction going, like you really need your menus to emerge from the action that created them, growing from the point of touch. In this instance, we have this whole menu that kind of appears and the actual screen is moving away from it. So from that kind of point of origin, it's really, really intuitive for users. It allows users to understand where menus go, how they interact with them, maybe possibly how to get back. In this scenario, it may be like a swipe. So really provides a lot of context. Use buttons for visual feedback. Sometimes we'll see like a button, there is like a failed state and the button just kind of has like an error state below it. And that's pretty good. But when I see really great interactions, I see the button itself showing different types of states. And we kind of talked about transformation as a concept, as a design principle in terms of motion. Try using the container of a button to provide visual feedback of a status. Like an example is like done in this case, or, publish, we're seeing this loading state, and then we're seeing a completion state afterward. Really helps users understand the context of what's happening right there and then instead of trying to look for it on screen. This is incredibly helpful. Create visual cues. Now, we see like designs generally use color, size, position to highlight, an important little action on screen, or like something that the user needs to notice or act upon. Now, when I see really great implementations of this, I see animation to bring attention to that important action without being too disruptive. This may be a little too extensive, but it's a nice little touch, especially if we see kind of like a bouncing red notification ball or, some sort of thing happening over here, a little animation, whether it just be like, like a little bell moving back and forth slightly every now and then, just to allow the users to know that, they should be interacting with that. And the thing is, when the user needs to act on something important, try to really animate those actions to attract their attention. Start with something subtle, like I mentioned, and maybe increase the intensity, change of size, color, speed, in relation to how important that action actually is. And you should really only use this for critical actions. And the more you use this effect, the less impactful it actually becomes. So don't just go using this throughout the entire application you're building or website you're building. And you may actually annoy your users. So definitely do this only for really critical actions. This may seem like common sense, but duration, speed, and easing are your friends if you use them properly. Timing is one of the most important considerations when designing transitions. Animations shouldn't be so fast or so slow. It keeps the user waiting. You gotta find that balance. The optimal speed is probably around 200 to 500 milliseconds for an interface animation. So, try your best to work within those means. And you'll see us in the future go through some projects when I'll kind of discuss, what seems good enough for an interaction, like especially in Figma, you can define that speed. But we can see here, the duration when the user parallax scrolls, we kind of see these photos come in and out and they ease very nicely and it's not so linear. We got to think about gravity. All objects, when they move, have some sort of acceleration or deceleration. That's what I'm talking about when it comes to like easing and speed and even duration. If you follow those same types of rules and you avoid linear movement, like I spoke about in the design principles section, you will avoid something that would seem so fake. We want to make this seem definitely much more real life. It just really helps create realistic types of animations. Okay, so we need to think about tone early on. These are two different websites, but I personally think that the way the motion is used here, we see that these are two different types of brands. They have two different types of tone. Think about the type of product you're designing and if a certain type of animation will suit it. Like a bouncing animation that we see here seems much more playful and joyful, and it's about excitement and it's about getting well, making yourself better. This is kind of like a body and health product. So it suits it. It suits even the illustrations. But when we look over here where there's this kind of like this architecture-based website, this is really, really interesting because it seems very modern. It seems very sophisticated. And even the animations and the motion used in here really help set that tone. They're very subtle. They come in and out very slowly. They're very sharp. And that's kind of the words that I would use to describe those types of animations used. And this is the last tip that I think is pretty important. A lot of people actually think that, like I said in the beginning, there's this misconception that motion is just like delightful animation, and it isn't. But, it could be used in that way to really help strengthen brand. So provide delight where it makes sense. user emotions play a huge role in interactions. We can reward users with animation for accomplishing a goal, maybe a confetti pop when you reach a weight goal. That really helps, strengthen the brand of the product or website. And it also sometimes keeps users coming back. So in this case, we have an example of Facebook's reactions, and they're really, really great because they allow users to express themselves in different ways. And as we see here, this is kind of a really cute way to kind of do that. But if we also think about even these kind of little things that are happening, this is kind of, once again, about tone, and maybe you wouldn't see this in a banking app or anything like that, but when a user clicks on this, it's kind of nice to see this small bouncing effect. Some may say this is not really delightful, but I mean, these little nuances when creating these micro interactions really help kind of set certain products apart. Here's another example. Completing an order, you have this little drone pick up your order, and then your order is placed. And there you go. Once again, kind of using the button to show all state changes, but going that extra mile and providing this little kind of cool animation to showcase that same concept. So definitely, if you have the time, think about where you can provide delight. Because I think it does make a lot of sense when we're kind of, for these different types of actions that, reward it, whether that be like placing an order, a user reaching their weight goal. You want your users to feel really happy using your product or using your website.